So today let's talk about writing Selenium test automation. Selenium is a great tool for writing your tests in. However, there's some pitfalls that you can encounter early on if you don't structure your tests correctly. Today I'm going to show you some of the best ways to structure your tests so that they're maintainable and repeatable and reliable. Early on you might notice that when you write tests they work for a little while but break, or the page may change a little bit and then you end up having to do a lot of refactoring work. With these tricks I'm using today, you'll find that you'll be able to write them in such a way that they're able to be refactored a lot easier. Some of the things I'm going to show you today are going to help your tests from becoming flaky. The worst kind of tests are the ones that will, basically fail for no particular reason. That can become more and more common now with a lot of the asynchronous operations and loads that web pages will do nowadays. So I'm going to show you how to use dynamic waits and other nice little things to keep your tests running reliably. And the other thing people run into with their test suites is that the web page will change over time and they have to spend a lot of time maintaining their tests and updating them. If you go ahead and write your tests in the right way, you should notice that they're easy to change. So let's get into that now. So as a demo today, I'm going to go surf over to the B&H Photo video website, and they have some functionality here to show you that there's free expedited shipping to wherever they think you live. So that can also be changed using this shipping location dialog and re-entering your zip code. So I'm going to write some tests to verify that that functionality works as expected. Okay, so for our first test, let's verify that the city shown for the free expedited shipping is not a blank value. So let's go over to our IDE and set up for our test. I'm using Java and JUnit 5, so let's create our first test decorator. Let's call this something descriptive like free shipping label city should not be blank. Alright, now the other neat thing that I've found, one of the headaches I used to have with Selenium is having to set up your driver and things like that. So I found a package called Chrome Driver Manager that all you have to do is throw in here like this, Chrome Driver Manage.getInstance.setup, and it will pull your Chrome driver for you and set it up automatically. So all we have to do now is create our driver equals new Chrome driver. Alright, so that's our wiring and now we can just go to our website. So driver.get, let's go to the BH Photo website. Okay, and once we're there, we want to verify that the label right here, or it's a span actually, is showing some non-blank value, right? So we know that this is a span with a class that has shipping dest on it. So let's locate it. Alright, so we're going to write an assertion here that it's not blank. So let me go back a step here. We are using Maven, so in our POM file for that WebDriver Manager, we just add this dependency to io.github.bonniegarcia for WebDriver Manager 1.70, and that will do all the magic for us on that. Next thing I like to do is use assert.j assertions. They're very fluid, so that's this dependency down there. And obviously you need your Selenium Java dependency. So let's hop back over. So now we have access to assert that. Okay, so let's assert that span element. So driver.findElement by.css selector. Okay, we know it's a span dot ship dest, right? I like to use IDs where possible, but when we don't have them, this works best too. Not empty. Let's try that. Alright, so let's run our test. it fails because we were expecting it not to be empty. So this will start with our first pattern, would be dynamic weights. So that element on that page is going to load dynamically. So it does start off, by the time we get here, it's going to be an empty tag until it loads in later. So we need to add a weight. To do that, we can add a new WebDriver weight. Okay, and that takes the driver and how many seconds you want it to wait. Let's say 5. Okay, and we're going to add an until condition. So it's going to check by default every half second until your conditions are met. So my expected conditions is that it's not going to have some empty text. You might also already notice that we're duplicating selection code, which we will refactor later. Alright, so now we've got the WebDriver wait for 5 seconds until the text is not an empty string. And then after that, we're going to assert that it's not empty, right? So it's a kind of a weird test because, you know, this is going to fail before this does, but this is just an example of some dynamic weights. So let's rerun this and see what happens. Alright, so we've got green, our test passed. So to this point we verified that the web page shows some non-blank value for the city. But now, to write a more useful test, let's change the zip code to a city that we know and verify that that's what comes through. So let's create another test declaration, @test public void free shipping label city should show Fort Lauderdale for 33331 zip code. And I'm also going to change styles a little bit. I like writing comments in a given when then format to kind of organize my thoughts here as I go. So before we even write code, let's write some comments. So given the landing page has loaded, when I change the zip code to 33331, then the city should change to Fort Lauderdale. All right, so we know how to set up our given again. We can just grab that from the test before. And then we're going to navigate to our website. And then now that we've changed pages, we want to add our weight. Alright, so now we just need to change the zip code. So driver.findElement by.css selector span ship dest. So now we're going to actually click on that span, and then once we've done that, we need to change the value in the zip input. So that's an input called shipping zip input by its class. And we're going to send the keys for the zip code. 1, 2, 3, 4. And lastly, we're going to click the submit button. Which is a div with a class applied to it called shipping zip button. We're going to click that. So that is going to be another asynchronous operation. So if we're to assert on that directly, we're going to have a problem. So to save time, let me just copy and paste some syncing code that I've got. And why not move it up here instead? All right, so we know we're there. And so now we can assert that driver.findElement by .css selector span.shipDest.getText is equal to Fort Lauderdale. When we run it, let's see if this works. And it worked. So I wouldn't consider these tests written in such a way that they are easily maintainable, and there's a lot of duplicate code and things like that, right? So let's go ahead and revise this a little bit. So first thing, what I'd like to see happen is that we have our driver declared once as a public static at the top of our test class, okay? And then let's start leveraging before each, before all, and after all, okay? So I like in my after alls to do the quit. So that's where I'm gonna close my browser. After all runs after all the tests have finished running. And then the before is where I would do all of my wiring, right? So the before class, right? That would run once before all of the tests, not on each test run, okay? So that's where I'm gonna put my Chrome driver manager.getInstance.setup and then instantiate my Chrome driver. And in the before each, that is up to you, however you want to reset your tests for the next run so that it's in a predictable state. In this case, going back and refreshing the BH Photo Video website seems like a good idea, as well as waiting for the value not to be blank. And that should get us in a good state, right? So then this test is going to go away. That was from me playing earlier. Let's bring over our test cases and redesign them a little bit. Okay, so we don't need this, and we don't need that driver get, and we don't need the wait. Okay, so we can just change this to given I am on the landing page, the shipping city should not be blank. We can take out the driver.quit line because that happens after all the tests are run. It's expensive to close the browser and reopen on every test, so I tend not to do that unless it's necessary for the test scenario. In this case, it is not. Okay, and then here's another place where we can get rid of some of the extra code. Tests are already much simpler. Okay, so here is this. We need to keep that for now. And we can get rid of the driver quit. All right, so now we have a lot less lines. We can run both tests at the same time. If these tests play nicely, they should be able to run right after the other without causing issue. And they do. Excellent. Perfect, perfect, perfect. Okay, so now we're going to want to refactor this so that if the page changes some of the selectors and things like that, it gets reworked. We don't need to go in here and change the by CSS selector all over the place. It's kind of annoying. So we're going to create a package called pages, and let's create a landing page, okay? And here we'll have a driver, okay, and the landing page takes the driver from your test, and that's where we can do some of the sync up code. All right, so this is very important when you're doing things like multi-page tests. When you transition from one page to the next, I like to have a wait of some sort. You can wait on the URL or maybe some lower element on the page, especially when there's asynchronous load things present, to make sure that they've loaded, right? So in this case, we want to make sure that that city selector is no longer blank. So we're just going to put that right in the page load. And then what I do is I'll throw an exception if my tests aren't in the state I think they should be. So here's an illegal state exception, in this case, landing page not in the expected state, right? So that gets us set up on step one. Now we're going to want to define all the page elements in here so that I don't have to have selectors all over my test class. And if something does change, I just change it here on the page, in this page class, without having to do it in a million different test cases. So just refactor in one place and I will be much better off. So we're going to create a public web element called the city span, and that's going to return driver.findElement by .css selector span dot, and let's see, what was that? That was span.shipDest, okay? Span.shipDest. All right, and what else did we use? We needed the zip input. And lastly, we had the button to OK that, right? Let's take that and put it here. All right, so we have our 3 elements. We've got some sync code for the landing page, so let's refactor yet again. All right, so now we're just going to create an instance of the landing page in here. That's going to float around. Public landing page, landing page. So in here, we're going to call it, actually, we should be doing it here. All right. Landing page equals new landing page driver. Okay, so here, once we create the new, it's going to run that wait code so that we know that the city element has loaded itself up, right? So we know we're safe here. So after the gets, in my case, is where I always create the instantiation of the different page elements. And that's where I'll have my sync code, so I know that it's safe to move on and that the page is actually loaded. And that helps with the test being reliable. So now that we have our landing page element, instead of having to do all this, I can just do landing page dot city span dot get text is not empty. Let's rerun. And that's still passing, and let's do that here too. A lot more readable. So this is going to be zip input. And landing page dot zip button. Zip button. All right. And lastly, let's change our assertion. Landing page dot get. Oops. Zip city span. Dot get text is equal to Fort Lauderdale. Let's rerun all these tests and make sure they still work. All right, so there we go. So if any of these elements change, instead of having to make the change in all those places you saw me just refactor, I can just change it here. So if this changed to destination, right, I would just make the change here and all of my tests would be automatically updated. And that will cut back a lot on the time you have to spend maintaining your tests. And with the dynamic weights, It will make sure that your tests are ready to run reliably, and this is much better than some sort of hard-coded sleep, right? So you could have just slept the test for 5 seconds or something to wait for the conditions to match up what you were expecting, but you're paying that penalty every single time, even if it only takes 1 second or less to load. So dynamic waits should always be used where possible. So using the page object model pattern will allow you to write your tests in such a way that they're easily refactorable, and the dynamic waits will allow you to write reliable assertions on asynchronous content, which most of the web is nowadays. So I hope you found this video very useful. This is a bit of an intro tutorial. I hope to do more advanced videos later. This is just a getting started. If you have any questions, be sure to leave them in the comments section below. If you found it useful, please subscribe and like. I really appreciate it. And thanks for watching.